Well, hi, and welcome to the second of my live streams where I answer your cruise questions live. I'm Gary Bembridge. Of course, the channel is Tips for Travelers. If you're joining me live, really appreciate it, and thanks. Don't forget that if you are live and you want to ask me any questions, pop those into the chat section, and I will try and answer as many of those as possible during the course of the 1 hour live stream. If you're watching this after the event, you can, of course, jump to the questions that were asked, because I'll put using the YouTube chapters process. So down the bottom, you'll see where you can jump to the different questions that are asked. But thanks once again for joining me. What I thought I would do is, first of all, what I did last time is answer a more personal question, give you a bit of insight about me, which also helps as people start joining the live stream, and then also ask a question that someone's asked more around my plans, etc. And then we'll get into the questions. I have both questions that I've got, which were posted on the channel over the course of the last week, and also, of course, then there will be your questions as well. Whoops, we want that, we want me rather. So first of all, let me just do one thing about myself. One of the things that people might not know about me is obviously I have the channel, I've got the blog as well, but also a couple of years ago, I was asked to write a book about cruising, which was part of a series of different types of travel. There was family travel, adventure travel, career break travel. And so I was asked to do one on cruising. So it's part of the Traveler's Handbook series. So that book I did a couple of years ago. And so that's one thing you may not know about me. So let me ask one of the more personal questions. Well, not really, it's not really that personal, that I've had around myself. And that's around 2021. I get lots of questions, and I've done a few videos around 2021 and things you need to think about. The critical thing to say before we start is nobody knows, including the cruise line executives, when cruising is going to start up again. So although we have those startup dates, as we know, which are at the moment for most cruise lines around about August, because the no sail order from the CDC in the US runs out theoretically at the end of July, and we're waiting to hear what happens on that. So we don't really know what cruises are going to happen in 2020. We don't even know what cruises theoretically going to happen in 2021. So what have I got booked for 2021 at this moment? Well, most of the cruises that I have for 2021 are probably, like many people, are cruises that I was planning to do this year, which have got moved. So I still have some cruises in 2020. I'm not sure whether they're going to happen or not. But Leon's asked me this a couple of times, so I thought I would share what I actually have in place for 2021, and then we'll get into the questions. So in January, at the moment, I'm due to travel on Enchanted Princess in the Caribbean. I am supposed to be on Enchanted Princess when it comes out of the shipyard, but of course that's been delayed for this year, and I don't know if that's going to happen. So January in the Caribbean. February, I'm actually doing a land-based trip, and then in March, back to the Caribbean, going out on the Virgin Scarlet Lady. So I'm very excited. I toured that in when it was in Dover on its way to, just before the whole shutdown happened, when it was on its way to enter service, which of course it hasn't done yet. So I'm doing that in March. Also in March, I'm going on Celebrity Edge. Now, those of you who follow the channel know I've done some videos about Celebrity Edge, but that's really been based on only touring the ship. So this will be my first chance to cruise. Another delayed cruise will be happening in May, when I'll be going on Queen Mary 2 on a Transatlantic. This will be about the 5th or 6th Transatlantic, and I'm really excited to do it because my videos about Cunard are very, very out of date. So looking forward to doing that. That was something I was supposed to do this year for my birthday. Didn't happen, so doing next year for my birthday. Then in June, heading back on Holland America to the Baltic. So those are mostly cruises that have been moved around and shipped around, like many people, for 2021. Linked to that, a lot of people have asked me around, when cruises will be starting up, what's happening. Again, I just want to stress, and you'll see interviews with all of the cruise executives, is they do not know when cruises are going to be starting up again. So if you're booking cruises, bear in mind, there's always that risk that they're not going to happen. So make sure when you're booking, you're understanding what the cancellation terms are. Do you have insurance for any time cancellation or sort of any reason cancellation? The other thing I get asked a lot, which is linked to that, is I get a lot of these sort of questions from people, is they've got cruises perhaps in October, September, November, the same as I do, and people want to know, should they cancel them? So Rosalind 313 had asked this. My advice always to people, if you've got a cruise coming up, is hold as firm as you can. Of course, if you have to pay the final balance, you might find that you are more uncertain and want to take a decision. But you need to hold firm, wait until the cruise lines start up before you start booking. The advantage of doing that is once the cruise lines start cancelling, you often have the option then of taking cash, if that's important to you, or often they'll give you bonus future cruise credits. So try to wait as long as you possibly can. That's certainly what I've been doing for all of my cruises. So let's take a dive into seeing some of the comments that are coming through, and I'll try and start answering some of those and then jump back in. This is a question that I have had many times, so thanks, Dennis, for asking this. The question is around masks, and do I really believe that cruisers are going to have to wear masks in public areas once cruising starts up? So first of all, I can tell you what's happening with river cruising, which is pretty certain, and what is happening with ocean cruising. So first of all, let's talk about river cruising. Now, as you might have known from some of the updates that I've done, and also you might have just read more generally, Nico Cruises, which is a river cruising company in Europe, has started doing some river cruising along the Rhine, and that started, I think it's a week or 2 weeks ago now. It's only for German passengers, only on the Rhine in Germany, and masks are definitely part of that process. Masks have to be worn when there's gatherings, so for example, briefings, for example, and they do have to be worn when on excursions, so in the bus and on excursions. Now, the reason for that is mask wearing is still a big part of what is required from a public health position in those countries where they're sailing. Now, Rosa are due to start sailing, I think it's this weekend or soon, in Portugal on the Douro, I pronounce it correctly, and we will see how important masks are. Across Europe, which are hoping to start up in August, Across Europe is the biggest and oldest established river cruise company in Europe, owned by the Schmitzer family, based in Strasbourg, and they're going to again start doing river cruisings. In their protocols, masks are a really key part of the whole process, mostly again related to when there's things like the safety briefings, that kind of stuff, and again on excursions. So river cruising, masks are definitely part of it at this point in time, because where people are sailing, it's required. So let's take a look at ocean. Now, as we've seen, there are no ocean cruises sailing as yet. A couple of companies like Genting, which control Crystal, for example, they've released their thoughts on protocols. Norwegian Cruise Line, which I did a video about, have released protocols. Masks are not mentioned in either of those protocols at this point in time. But listening again to various interviews, like with Arnold Donald from Carnival recently, Richard Fain from Royal Caribbean, what they have said is they will need to reflect whatever the social norm is, and importantly, what the port requirements are. So if masks are required when you head out in port, then masks will become part of it. As regards on the ship, I am very skeptical that masks will be a big part of it, because I think social distancing of some form, reduced numbers, are more likely. Will we have to wear them at the muster drill? If you think when there's lots of gathering of people, because if you're heading off into the restaurants, if you're heading into the theatre, those sort of things, it's going to be easy to plan social distancing by having fewer passengers on board, and masks are probably going to be less a key part of it. Even in casinos, we've seen what's happening in Las Vegas, how they're managing to spread people out in the casino. So those kind of things, I would be surprised if masks are going to be key to the process. Just personally seeing what's happening out there. Muster drill, when everyone's coming together, that feels to me a little bit more like it could be. But certainly the answer to the question, I don't answer in quite detail because you asked my opinion, but certainly at this point in time, I don't think masks are going to be a big part, and I think cruisers are very resistant to that. So let's have a look. I'll try and do these in order. I know last week, looking back on the feed, I realized I sort of leapt through some people, some very kind comments saying they're pleased to see the live stream will be regular. I'm going to definitely try and do it every week. The advantage also is when cruising does start up again, many of the cruise lines, of course, have good enough Wi-Fi to hopefully do this as well moving forward. Angela commented again about looking forward to seeing what I think of Scarlet Lady actually cruising it, which is going to be very exciting. The other thing I forgot to mention, I think, in future cruises, is when because I had a booking on Virgin, and they offered a very generous 200% bonus if you if you took future cruise credit. So I managed to book my Scarlet Lady trip, but I'm also in the process of looking at Valiant Lady in the Mediterranean, and that's pretty much my future cruise credit is going to cover those 2 cruises. So I'll be able to cover both of those as a real traveler. He's saying, I'm waiting to see if I'm sailing the Mediterranean this September. Mediterranean and cruising is very interesting. I was actually just reading an article today, which Cruise Critic posted around that very question, Dee, around what is the expectation for the Mediterranean. Now, the MSC cruises have made probably the most significant step forward in that it's reported, and they've made it clear that they are recruiting crew to come back to the ships in the Mediterranean, joining the ships towards the end of July, mid to end of July, so they can be trained up. So certainly MSC are looking and hoping that they can cruise in the Mediterranean. Now they, of course, operate a lot of ships in the Mediterranean. They could probably very easily do itineraries which only cover Italy or only cover Spain or whatever. And so they may be more optimistic. Certainly, when you look at what's happening around Europe, for those of you who are not in Europe will know that in the middle of June, I think it's quite soon, probably this coming week, the EU is going to open their borders to let people within the EU, Switzerland, the UK, move around the borders much more. There's still some restrictions on and limitations around that. There is not a specific date that I've seen where international travelers are going to be let in. At this point in time, they're starting to start up land-based trips. So certainly land-based travel is starting up in July into August. However, what the cruise lines are saying, the challenge that they face is every single port is requiring different negotiations because every single country has its own health regulatory body. So, for example, in the UK, you have Public Health England. There is a European Centre for Disease Control, a bit like the US one, but they tend to issue more guidelines. So the problem they have at the moment is negotiating country by country. So what I think we're going to see starting up is, and there's strong signals towards that, is much more regional cruises. So, for example, Pullmantur has spoken about running French-only cruises. I think I mentioned last time that Hurtigruten and Sea Dream are running cruises around Norway, ports out of Norway, which are initially only for Norway residents, expanding into Danish residents because they're creating like one of those travel bubble things. So I think we're going to see some stuff starting very tentatively, but they're going to be very locally based. The question is, are they going to be open, which we don't know yet, only to residents within a particular country? So I would say at best, if I was a gambling man, which I am a little bit when I'm on ships, I would say 60% no, maybe 70% no. And if we take a look, for example, 2 of the big UK-based companies, P&O Cruises and Cunard, they have cancelled all cruises. So P&O have cancelled them right through to the middle of October already, Cunard into November, beginning of November and the end of November. And although they, at that time of year, they would normally be selling accommodation in Northern Europe and Mediterranean itineraries. So I think it's really, it's not really, not that optimistic. Let's have a look at the next question. So Jack's asked around social distancing. Social distancing is something that causes lots of debates. Is it possible on a ship or not? One of the things that I experienced, because I was on the Holland America Zeta Dam in the run up to the shutdown, I was actually on the ship still when the shutdown happened, and actually we only went back to port about 5 or 6 days after the shutdown. That was sailing probably about 60% full, I would guess. I never found out the exact number. And actually social distancing just happened naturally. It was before it was really a big thing. But I found going to the dining rooms, I could always get a table very easily. We were kind of spread out in the theatre. There was always loads and loads of space in the theatre. If you went to bars, it was never massively packed and spread out. So from those areas, it certainly worked pretty well with lower capacity. Elevators is going to be a big challenge. Now, I did see an interview this week, and I think it was with the Points guy. Had interviewed, I can't remember who they interviewed, and then also Doug Parker had interviewed one of the cruise directors. And what they spoke about is there would be some kind of limits on elevators, as we're seeing, as happened as offices and shops opening. For example, I'm based in the UK, as you know. From tomorrow, non-essential shops are opening, and all of those shops have limits on the number of people that are allowed in elevators. So I think you're going to find, probably initially anyway, elevators are probably going to be restricted to people who have needs for it, because they're not very mobile, and numbers of them. As you can imagine, on those big ships, it's going to be a really big challenge. So again, we don't know. So that is kind of a speculation. I saw someone asking a question about Norwegian Cruise Line. I specifically want to answer the one on Norwegian Cruise Line. So, because there is, excuse me, quite a big update on Norwegian Cruise Lines, I think, happening. So the question from Hospice Medic is, how do you think the cruise lines will thin the passengers? I'm selling Norwegian Cruise Lines November the 1st, and I don't want to be bumped. We don't yet know. However, what we are seeing is cruise lines starting to take cruises off the schedule. So someone picked that up the other day, that they'd noticed that some Carnival cruises which had been advertised had stopped being on sale. So if you search certain cruises, they disappeared. So that could be an indication that they were getting near to the sort of capacity they need. Very interestingly, I posted a video on Friday, which was a summary of latest news and updates. And I'll try and do a weekly one of those as well, with just some latest news. And some very eagle-eyed person spotted, or they got some inside knowledge, that Norwegian Cruise Lines have taken all of their August sailings off the website. You can't book any of the August trips. So that could mean one of two things. One, that either they are planning to announce a postponement and are expecting to sell in August, or perhaps we're seeing that they had reached some sort of capacity and they've taken those off to manage capacity. So I don't know the answer to thinning questions, but one of the things that we might see is they just stopped selling cruises. Now, some cruises are clearly going to be sold out. So particularly, everything like Enchanted Princess, or some of these cruises coming out, or there was the Saga, Spirit of Discovery, and Celebrity Apex, although they've had to cancel lots of cruises because it couldn't go into service. A lot of those are often sold out, but they've all actually been taken off sale, if you like, so they're not on sale anyway, so they can control them and come back on. But pretty much, I was looking at cruises because one of the things I like to do is look at cruises and see availability. But pretty much every single cruise that I've looked at, there's always been availability. So I'm guessing they'll just pull cruises off. When it's full, we don't yet know what they're going to do. But I would watch out for your cruise kind of being taken off sale. I'll keep an eye on what's happening with Norwegian, but very interesting that every single sailing in August has been pulled. I looked at Oceania and Region 7C, which are their partner, that's part of the same group. They still had August sailings available. So that could mean that they were full. It could mean that they're coming off. So we don't know. A couple of other people who asked the question. Steve O's asked the same question about that. Steve O's was saying he's on Celebrity Southern Caribbean on January the 2nd, looks pretty full. So a lot of them do look full. And of course, we don't yet know, of course, if people have actually even, the cruise lines might have blocked those off already. Let me answer this next question from Justin Egan. Can you recommend some really long cruises? Maybe one that is 6 months plus. Heading out on a cruise for 6 months is very appealing, especially with every crazy thing going on. And once it all settles down, getting away for 6 months. As you probably know, Justin, and most people know, is many of the big cruise lines offer world cruises. They, however, tend to be 3 to 4 months long. So one of the most famous of all of those, of course, is Cunard. They were the ones who really created the world cruise concept. And I'm trying to remember the exact date. I think it's back in the 20s, but I can't remember the exact date. But now you'll find, a lot of, like Continental America will have a world cruise. Princess has a world cruise. MSC recently, a couple of years ago, started having world cruises. So you'll find a lot of them have world cruises. A lot of the premium or the very ultra luxury cruise lines have world cruises, which again are 3 to 4 months long. However, a couple of years ago, maybe last year, a couple of the cruise lines introduced really long cruises, and I don't know that they expect everyone to sell all of those, but Silversea, for example, introduced, if I remember correctly, there were 2 of them, one of which was an expedition cruise, and that was basically spanning the 2 polar seasons. So you have Antarctica, which happens from about November through to about March time. So last year I was lucky enough to go on one of the last cruise, the last cruise on Silver Sea, Silver Cloud at the end of the March period. And this year, if everything works out, I'm going on the first cruise in November on Pullmantur as they start the Antarctic season. So anyway, the Antarctic season starts around that time. The Arctic, did I say Antarctica? Antarctica season, just to clarify. The Arctic season starts around about June-ish time, and so runs over the European summer. And what Silver Sea had done is they had planned, and I think it was on the Silver Explorer, a 6-month cruise which spanned those two. So you could start, and if I remember correctly, you started in the Shire. I can't remember exactly where it started, but it went to Antarctica, part of the Antarctic season. It basically worked its way all the way up, doing expeditions all the way, and eventually ended up in the Arctic. I think I'm also right in saying that Silver Sea also looked at a very long extended cruise. And Viking, which I think at this point in time makes the claim of having the longest continuous world cruise, which actually ended, or was due to end this year at about May time. So I guess it got truncated. So those, certainly Silver Sea and Viking, and I think Oceania, if I remember correctly, had a very long, they used the Insignia ship, which basically circumnavigated the world. Again, with all those long cruises, they normally chop them up into sort of 3-week slots, so you can buy those various slots. But those are the ones to look at. The good news is they exist, Justin. The bad news is you probably need to be really, really wealthy, because many of those on very premium, very, very premium lines. So let me keep going. Excuse me, I'm sort of having to scroll down because it keeps scrolling me to the top. Lots of comments on masks and views on masks. And right, let me answer Kelly's question. So Kelly's asking, if you were going to book a cruise, which month would be the earliest month you would book in 2020 and 2021? So this is a really difficult one indeed, because a lot of it is going to depend in reality about how optimistic one is. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I do have cruises through the rest of this year, and I'm not that optimistic that they are going to be going. I don't see a lot of mood music and movement, even with everything that's going on land. If you think, the big cruising areas like the US, which of course still has lots of challenges with the virus. We don't know if there's a second wave. I mean, I know as lockdown's gone, there's some stuff coming up. We've seen the same in China. The UK, which is another, big important cruising area. You've got Spain. So some of these countries where cruising is very strong have been particularly hard hit by the virus. And I guess a lot of the governments are waiting to see what happens with the second wave. So certainly in terms of 2020, my personal view for 2020 is I'm not planning to book any more cruises in 2020. I'm expecting them to go. So I wouldn't book any 2020 cruises until we know exactly what cruises are happening, if they're happening, and when they're happening. The reason for that also is the cruise lines have all said that it's unlikely that it'll just be like a light switch, boom, and all the ships will head out on the itineraries that were planned. They're probably going to have to do much more of a mix and match. They probably will start with a couple of ships, see how it goes, see what the demand is. It'll depend on how many ports are open. So they might not be able to run the cruises exactly as they want. They might have to craft some cruises they hadn't planned. So I would actually wait until the very specific cruises come on sale. Because if you're booking a cruise in October or November or December, no one knows if that's going to operate, not even the cruise lines. So booking those, you kind of risk, I think there's just too much risk, and the danger is you've paid deposits, you might have to pay final balances, you then get caught up in that whole refund process. In terms of 2021, as I mentioned, my earliest cruise that I have is January. Again, I'm not entirely sure that January things will be up and running, but January was the earliest that I felt comfortable sort of committing to a cruise. I felt that we'd probably be through enough of the second wave, we'd be through enough of CDC rules, some ships might be starting to sail, but again, will they be back in service? I'm not 100% sure, but I know that what I booked, to be honest, I booked where you had to pay a £50, what's that, $75 deposit. So it was nothing. There was very little risk. I'm not going to have to pay a balance. I think it's been reduced to 60 days balance payment. So I'm not going to have to pay until November time. So I felt pretty comfortable. It's $75 worse I'm going to lose, and I'm going to have to make a decision in November. So sorry, that's a very long way of answering. If you wanted much more security, I would go right towards the end of 2021. If you're optimistic, want to get back to cruising, of course, I want to get back to cruising as soon as I feel it's ready and safe and whatever. So that's what I've done. I hope that's answered. I've answered that. Let's have a look. KB in the UK. Hi, KB. I think you answered some questions last week. I hope I managed to answer them. So a friend of ours wants to cruise with us as a single cruiser, her own room. Which cruise line would you recommend to give her the best deal for the money? I've heard Norwegian Cruise Line is pretty good. As everybody knows, cruising as a solo traveler can be really, really expensive. Now, I cruise quite a lot as a solo traveler, obviously to try and do stuff for the channel, and because I'm a complete addict to cruising, and I try and go cruising every month. So I do cruise solo quite a lot, and it is a very expensive way of doing it. And there's three ways that you can approach it. If you're looking for a blanket, simple answer, you're right, Norwegian Cruise Line is a really good option to look at. The reason they're a good one to look at is certainly all of their most recent ships have a whole solo cruise section. And it has multiple numbers of cabins. It has a little solo cruise lounge. It's a security controlled area. So you have to, if you're a solo traveler, you have your cruise card, lets you into that area. There's also cabins in there, and you have a lounge, which is quite good, particularly for solo travelers to meet each other. So there's normally quite a lot of availability for solo cabins, and they're normally priced pretty sharply. The downside is, depending on what your preference is, they're all inside cabins and they're pretty small. So if she's traveling with you, but she wants her own cabin, she will certainly have that. And of course, then she can spend more time with you. As a solo traveler, she is going to know people. She might want to be out and about. So that's definitely a really good option. Many other cruise lines have solo cabins, but not to the same degree. So, all the big ships like the Royal Caribbean has them. Holland America is not very good at all for solo cabins. They have very few. Cunard added a couple onto their ships, but you have to plan far ahead. So that's my second point. If you want to go on a ship or a cruise line like Holland America, you have to choose a very specific ship, like their very most recent ships. Or on Cunard, you have to plan, 18 months in advance. Princess has no solo cabins at all. Oceania has no solo cabins. Seabourn has no solo cabins. Silversea has no solo cabins. So you're much more limited on the general choice. The third thing, which is what I do a lot of, is I follow a couple of the aggregator sites which have a solo traveler section. So in the US, Vacation to Go is a good one. In the UK, ROL Cruises is a good one. And they have a very dedicated solo section. Also, you can also often sign up to a newsletter. And what they do is they're very good at pushing out when cruise lines are doing no solo supplement. So, for example, the Pullmantur cruise that I was talking about, that's Antarctica, so it's a really expensive cruise. If you're paying a massive supplement, it's just a non-starter. But what Pullmantur were doing, they were running for a period of time a promotion as no supplement, so you didn't pay any supplement. So I got that through tracking those sites to see when those promotions were up. So, for example, if you do want to go on the ultra luxury lines, if you take a look at Silversea, for example, they have a section called special offers, and one of the special offers they have is one of their little buttons, drop-down buttons, is for solo cruises. But the easiest thing to do is track those aggregator sites for solo cruises. And there's a couple of other ones, find most of the ones, whether it's Cruise First or all those, a lot of them will have a solo section. I know some of the cruise companies like Monday Cruising in the UK, for example, they bring out a little booklet every now and again, which is all solo deals. Cruise and Maritime, for example, have lots of solo deals. So you find lots of those ways to do. So that's the third thing. Simplest and easiest is go on a Norwegian cruise or one of the biggest ships. The second one is plan way in advance, and the third one, but more than the third one, is to track those offers. But it's really challenging because it's really expensive normally. Let's have a look at this one here. Steve-O's on fire, literally. I can see that then he's asking lots of questions. So we're quite loyal to Celebrity, but would like to go on European river cruises. Do you know of any current or rumored partnerships between Royal Caribbean Cruise Line and River Brand? I have heard nothing along that line at all. And we have seen a couple of the cruise lines like Crystal. They have got river cruising. Saga in UK, they've got a river cruising line. But no, I haven't seen that. And I think probably historically that's because there's been so much growth in ocean, and river is kind of a very different experience. And what we've seen, river cruising has tended to come much more out of companies that have had it's called a touring background rather than a cruising background. If you look at most of those companies, that's where a lot of the management, etc., come from. So haven't seen anything. If you're asking for lines that are similar to Celebrity in the kind of the feel and the style, I would take a look at a couple of them. So I would take a look at some of the ships which are perhaps a little bit more contemporary, because I always see Celebrity, Celebrity is very traditional, but does things in a slightly more contemporary way. So the river cruise lines that I like, which I think would be a good match if you like Celebrity, would be Avalon, for example. So Avalon is very interesting. Avalon are trying to move to a much more, I forgot what they call it. It's something like active something or other. But basically what they do is they have, programs on board which are much more active. They have much more healthy eating. They have bicycles on board. You can do things like cycle tours, but the decor and stuff is much more contemporary. It's not sort of as glitzy and blingy as you might find a Uniworld is. So that's one to look at. The other one, which is also probably the same quality as Celebrity and is very slick, is Amma Waterways. I really like Amma Waterways. They have very beautiful ships. The decor is actually quite modern, quite contemporary, not quite as modern as, say, the Edges, but pretty contemporary. And again, very good level of service. Again, pretty active. They have, I think it's called an active, they have a person on board basically who will take out all the cycle tours. They will run classes every day. They, that kind of stuff, so, which is all included. And again, they have beautiful menus, lots of choice. Unlike Celebrity, these things tend not to have, especially separate dining venues. So those probably are two of the lines that I would look at. You could also probably look at Scenic. It's also an interesting one to look at. They're pretty contemporary. They're probably the most modern decor of all of them, most modern of all of them, which is an Australian-owned company. And they have a sister brand called Emerald, which I really like as well, which is a little bit more relaxed. So nothing on partnerships, but certainly European river cruising, that's the one to look at. If I can give another piece of advice on river cruising, focus on the Rhine, focus on the Danube, because those are the two kind of real classic ones. They are quite busy as rivers, but certainly if you're doing a river cruise for the first time, look at those ones. I would certainly take a look at. So let's have a look. Asking when cruising is starting again. I don't know the answer to this question, but I'm going to put it out there and I'm going to find out why through my various contacts. So HM the King, so maybe it's Prince Charles, hello, or maybe it's Prince Philip. Anyway, HM the King out of Windsor. Gary, do you know what cruise lines offer much better deals to US customers than in the UK for the same cruises? I don't really know that, and I'll try and explore and see if that's true or how that all works. One of the things to look at is what's included and what's not included. So, for example, I know that when you look at the UK prices, if you strip out things like airfare, for example, normally you'll find port fees are included in the fare. So you don't normally pay the fare plus port fees and sometimes taxes separately. It's normally all bundled in because that's part of the regulations in the UK. You don't, even if you go to the shop, for example, as you know, if you live in the UK, you live in the UK. As you know, in the UK, sales tax, everything's bundled in. If you go to the US, you'll have the price and then the various state tax or whatever will get added on. So I've noticed often when I've looked at cruises, prices in the US, you'll get a price and then you'll get a charge for port taxes. So for example, when I was originally looking at the Virgin cruises, for example, I was looking at the US site, and those were actually pulled out. So actually, I think I'd originally booked through the US site. So when the refund came, I got a refund for the taxes as a cash refund, and the fare part I got as the future cruise credit with the bonus. So that could be one thing, being very clear about what's included and what's not included. I'll have a little exploration and see if I can find out much more in next week on the live chat if I found out anything more. One of the things that I do look at quite a lot, I do look at the comparable sites. One of the things I also know, which could be part of the answer, I'm sort of thinking loud now, is that what the UK companies do is they normally will bring out a brochure price, and they will have hedged against a rate, or they will sort of set a rate. So certainly when I was working in the corporate world, I used to work for Johnson & Johnson, and I had like a global job. And every year we would set a rate to the US dollar, and then everything internally and even externally would be based on that pricing. Now, what I understand what happens with the UK companies, and I remember asking this at Brexit time, when that was all bubbling up, when the pound fell quite sharply, he's asking what was going to happen with prices. And the answer at that time is the prices had been set based on an agreed US dollar. So within the corporation, they were taking whatever hit that was. So that could also be another answer to the question is, when they peg their rates, it's pegged on an agreed dollar, which of course that may change. But of course in the US, as they've got a price, whatever the price, that could be why there's some differential, if they've agreed a rate and that which is set higher. But I'll try and see if I can find out more from my various contacts. So here's a place that's very true to very passionate to me. Sorry, I keep drinking water, talking so much. So one of the things I've found actually during the lockdown, and if you found this as well, is I don't talk. Obviously I've got my partner here and my partner's here all day working. I'm finding I'm actually talking to people much less. So I find when I talk for long periods of time, it's actually quite difficult. But anyway, let's talk about the Panama Canal. So do you prefer going east to west or vice versa through the Panama Canal, port side or starboard side, and on which ship? So this is really great timing because I went through the Panama Canal as my last cruise before shut down on the Zeta Dam. We did a partial transit. I think it was my third time being on the Panama Canal. I've actually just finished this week, editing off a video about tips around the Panama Canal. And so coming out, I haven't decided what date I'm going to release that video, but coming out will be a video about the Panama Canal, all the different options, and answering more questions. But let me just answer this right now. First of all, what I would say is if you haven't done the Panama Canal or not planning to do the Panama Canal, please put it on your list now. Some people call it a bucket list, some people call it a must-do list. Panama Canal, if you love cruising, is one of the most amazing, remarkable experiences ever. I just love it. It's like I'm trying to plan my next Panama Canal cruise. It's the most magical experience. Personally, I like going from the Caribbean side through to the Panama City side. So that's the sort of the east to west side. And the reason I like that way is, although it doesn't really make a massive difference, but for me, one of the most magical things of the Panama Canal is the Gatun locks. The Gatun locks, for those of you who don't know the Panama Canal, the Panama Canal is not just one canal. It's about 50 miles long. You come in, I'll talk through the east, through the eastern side. You come in and you go through the Gatun locks, which is a series of 3 locks. They take you up about 28 feet each time. So the advantage is you go into that lock, go into that series of locks, and you get this magical experience of going up 3 times. And it's when it's fresh in the morning. It's normally about 7, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning. You're fresh because it takes the whole day to go to the Panama Canal. And I think this is the most amazing part of the locks. You then head up into the Gatun Lake. You sail through the lake, and then you go through the Galliard Cut, which is this long, thin, narrow channel. Then you head down. Then you survey the top, and then you're going to come down the other side into Panama City. And there's 2 different sets of locks there. So I always get this the wrong way around. So you go through the Miraflor locks first, which is 2 chambers. Then you sail along a bit and you go down the Pedro Miguel locks, which is 1 chamber. And so you do still get the 3 steps, but it's not all in one. It's not all in one go. It's kind of split up. So the reason I discovered they weren't built as 3 is there was some fault lines, so they didn't want to have the 3 locks together. Either way is fantastic, but I think the Gatton locks, when you're fresh and everyone's really excited, it's a really great experience to go through. In terms of the port or starboard, really good question. So if you're going east to west, either side is great. So the advantage, because in reality, I wouldn't be in your cabin to go through the Panama Canal. They open up the bow of the ship normally, so you can go right on the front of the ship. I would spend my time at the front of the ship. I would spend the time at the back of the ship, and then at various points go and walk along the promenade deck, so you're right up against the locks themselves. So it doesn't really matter. The advantage if you're heading east to west, if you're on the starboard side, you're on the side where the other ships are coming down. So if you do want to be in your cabin or sit in your balcony, the advantage is if you're on the starboard side, so you're heading that away, you've got the side, you've got the other, the ships coming down. So you can actually sit in your balcony and watch the ships coming down the other side. If you're on the port side, you basically, when you go to the Gatton locks, you're looking at the land. When you're going through the Pedro Miguel and Miraflores is where the visitor centers are. So you're not seeing the ships on the other side. So you want to be really lazy or chill out. That's what I would suggest. And as I mentioned, I've got the Panama video coming a little bit later. I probably went on too long about the Panama Canal. It's something that I'm really, really passionate about. Thank you to 2 Chickens. I see you've given me a super sticker. Really appreciate it. Thanks for that again. I'm going to answer this question again. I touched on a little bit at the beginning, but it's worth coming back to again as people drop in and out or join a bit later. What date will cruise ships sail again? So Robert's asking that question. And again, the answer to that question is nobody knows. And you just have to look at the various interviews that have appeared just even over the course of the last week, again, with Richard Vane, Arnold Donald, and Norwegian Cruise Lines, is they don't know. Also, and I touched on it in the update video I did, the Center for Disease Control in the US, they had a statement to the press in the last 10 days, which again said they didn't have enough information to say when cruising could be safe to start again. Nobody knows. So at the moment in the US, you'll find cruises on sale from August. It seems to me very optimistic / unlikely. So nobody knows yet. I think we've seen indications the cruise lines already suggesting it's going to be late. As I mentioned, we've got P&O, Cunard already cancelling right through to October, November time. So nobody really knows. That's ocean. As I mentioned, river is starting up very locally. On the plus side, however, there are 2 cruise ships that are definitely sailing within the next few weeks because they have the sign-off and they have the approval of the health authorities. That's Hurtigruten, which is sailing 1 ship for Norwegian passengers only in Norway, and Sea Dream, which have actually brought on, they were bringing 1 ship, now they only have 120 guests. They have their 2nd ship then bringing on because the market was so great. Only selling to Norwegian ports, initially only for Norwegian. So that's the only ocean ones coming. The rest, we really don't know. Right, let me answer this question about, I know I'm jumping between river and ocean, so as I see the crew, I'm trying to do these. And I'll come back, I've just seen one I've missed about Transatlantic, I'll come back to it in a second. So Collins asks, thanks for the question, Colin, I'd like to try a river cruise, but don't like sharing tables except with my partner. Join the club. Are there any you know of that have tables for 2? It's really difficult when it comes to river cruising, getting a table for 2. Every river cruise that I've been on, the answer to that question is no. So I've been on Uniworld, Viking, Emma Waterways, Emerald, Avalon, across Europe, a couple of, I was due to go on Crystal Offers that got cancelled because of the COVID. I've been on some Saga ones. No, because the way it works, the way it worked, should I say, was they are bigger tables and you do have to share with people. It used to be open-seated dining, so it's very challenging. And it is normally just one restaurant. And you don't have things like room service normally. If there was a second dining room like Amma Waterways would have special nights where there was a curated chef's dinner. So no, there's not. However, what we've seen in some of the protocols coming for river cruising is this could be more of a possibility, because they are talking about having 2 dining sessions. So all the protocols we saw for Nico cruises or across Europe, they're going to have 2 dining sessions to basically spread people out much more. So actually the changes to river cruising moving forwards looks like it could make that more possible. But generally speaking, no. I often, as I mentioned, travel by myself because I'm doing this sometimes for the channel or whatever, and I normally find I have to sit with people. And the answer to that is also it takes a long time because you know, chatting stuff. So the short answer is no, but keep an eye on how the protocols change. I want to go back because I realized I missed a question from Nigel. Thanks for these Q&As. Really useful. Carrying on from a previous question, Nigel's asking, considering doing a Cunard Transatlantic, which would you personally recommend? Okay, so I think you might be asking, are you asking the east to west, the west to east, you know, Southampton, New York to Southampton? I think that's what you're probably asking. So again, I was talking about Panama Canal as one of the absolute must-do cruises. Again, I would say Cunard, Queen Mary 2, Transatlantic cruise is again another thing to have on your list. Queen Mary 2 is the only true ocean liner. Every other ship that out there is a liner, is a cruise ship. So the Queen Mary 2 is a very specifically designed, harking back to the old liners. It's a very unique ship. It's one of a kind. There's nothing else like it, whereas other cruise ships are fairly similar because they use the same hull and the same base, etc. So it's an amazing experience. Now, I personally, when we've been on crossings, I like to go from Southampton to New York. And the reason for that is that because of the time change, is what happens is there's a 5-hour time difference between the UK and the East Coast, so New York. So what happens is you add an hour each day of the 7 days. So you theoretically are having 25-hour days for 5 of the days. So the great news is you'll go out, you'll have your dinner, which of course is often you're dressing up. You go to the show, you might go to the bar, gambling, whatever you're going to do. You go to bed at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock, whatever, and you gain an hour. So it becomes 10 o'clock. So I really like that because you feel you're almost getting more for your buck, if you like, because the days are longer. When you're going the other way, you lose an hour. So you're theoretically having 23-hour days. And what they used to do is they used to do it overnight, which was a nightmare because you go to bed, if you're going to bed late at night and you were losing time. What they did on the last one I did, which was that direction, is they changed it at lunchtime, which actually made it slightly more manageable. So I would say definitely, if you can, the Southampton to New York is the option I would do. And definitely do it on the Queen Mary 2. Obviously, at certain times of the year, the Queen Victoria, the Queen Elizabeth will cross as part of the World Cruise or whatever, but do it on the Queen Mary 2. Hopefully that answered your question. So a question about Norwegian Fjords. MG. Now, Norwegian Fjords is another phenomenal cruise. And the question, which is a great question, is it marketing hype or do you really get to see what you get to see? When one goes on a Norwegian Fjord cruise with celebrity, in fact, with any line, do you get to go between those big hills, I think that's what you're saying, like in the photos on the internet? Absolutely, yes. The great thing about a Norwegian Fjord cruise is the fjords are very deep within the country. So the cruise ships will head into the fjord and sail down, whether it's Garangafjorda, Sondefjorda, whatever they are. And so you're sailing along and you have these vast cliffs on either side. And the great thing is you'll have that in early morning as you sail through, but also when you sail out at the end of the day, you have the same thing. And particularly because it's during summer, you have very long days. So the sun barely goes down, or might go down at 11 o'clock at night. So you can actually be out on deck or having dinner in the evening and you're sailing through those beautiful, beautiful cliffs. So absolutely you do, particularly if you go into the fjords. If you're heading to things like some of you might be going to places like Bergen and Stavanger and stuff, you see that less of it. Once you actually go into the fjords, absolutely, it's not just marketing hype. Norwegian Fjords is a great cruise. That's one I really want to get back and do. One of the cruises that I'm due to do in September, which I don't think is going to happen, was actually a Norwegian Fjord cruise on the new Saga ship, because the reason it won't happen is partly because I don't think cruises were started and the ship's delayed. And I'm really disappointed because I was really looking forward to the Norwegian Fjords. So I was asking about working for Pride of America, when it will sell again. Now, Pride of America, for those of you who don't know, let me just pop that up. Pride of America is I think I'm right in saying, is the only ocean ship which is flagged in the United States. And it's the Norwegian cruise ship, and it's the one that sails around Hawaii. So you depart and sail around Hawaii. And that means if you go to Hawaii, normally you sail from Los Angeles or San Francisco or wherever, and then you have 4 or 5 days to get to Hawaii, and then you have 4 or 5 days to go back or whatever. So it's not very efficient use of time. Now in the US, the Jones Act, I think it's known, I think it's actually called the Passenger Something Act. If a ship is not flagged in the US, when you leave a US port, you have to go to another foreign port before you can't just go US port to US port to US port, which is one of the challenges of cruising starting up. So the Pride of America is basically flagged in the US, and so it falls under a lot of the US regulations. And at this point in time, I've seen nothing. All I've seen, and I saw an update actually today, is Hawaii have quite a strict controls on people coming into the country, which is frustrating the ability to get normal travel back. So I believe at the moment they have the 14-day quarantine, which is going to be extended way into July, is what the ministry that was talking about. So I think we just have to wait and see what that quarantine period is going to be from anyone coming in from out of state. So I don't know when it will be sailing again, but it feels like it's being pushed further and further back. Someone who doesn't, Magic Apples doesn't like Cunard, had a really bad experience with Cunard. So sorry to hear that. Sent you a super chat, disappeared. Okay, hopefully you keep drawing that. The question here, following on, is Apex going to Norwegian Fjords? One of the things that's very interesting, and I've seen that quite a lot, and I'm a little bit with you on this one, is cruise lines are starting to send bigger and bigger ships into the fjords, and the fjords can handle a lot of those bigger ships because those fjords are extremely deep. So what it's called, the draft or wherever it's called. And so a lot of the big ships can go in, but they are very limited to where they can go into. So what I would strongly recommend, if you're looking at a big ship like Celebrity Apex, have a look at where it's going to and look at the itinerary very, very carefully, because you'll often find, and I was looking at, in fact, an itinerary the other day, a lot of them are sail-throughs. So you're not actually calling into ports because it's too many passengers. A lot of the Norwegian fjord ports are also tender ports. So if you go into like Garanga, for example, which is one of the classic ports, is they have to tender people. So you can actually go on big ships because you then tender people. Of course, it's quite a slow kind of process, and it gets very, very crowded. But a lot of them will include sail through. So they'll sail through the different things, the different fjords, etc. And they'll go to the places like Bergen, Stavanger. So be careful a little bit on that, that you're not really going into the places like Flam and Garanga Fjord and places like that. So look at it very, very carefully where it's going. I do think a more mid-sized ship is good. I mean, I've been there on the Queen Victoria, which I think is about 2,000 passengers. We were able to go into some very, very small places where the population was 300 people, and we managed to go in. Again, it was a tender port. And I can't remember the name of it. It was like 85 miles in that. I can't remember. We were able to go into some of those small places. KB, thank you very much for the super chat. Someone picking up on the Panama. I will talk about that in the video. I won't spend I feel like probably too much about Panama Canal, but they're absolutely right. There's actually 3 or 4 different options of going through the Panama Canal: the full, a partial, and I'll talk about that much more in the video. But definitely, partial is a great way of doing it because you get to see some of the real highlights. And as I mentioned, watch out for that video, and I'll go into much more on that. as can. So we're heading up quite soon, up to the hour. So I want to just try and see, I might have missed some cruises. I've definitely missed some cruises this year, some questions. So what I'll try and do is I'll pick those questions up if I haven't answered them in this hour that we've done today, and I'll make sure I'll bring them up at the beginning next time, and I will pick those up. I want to quickly answer. I'll try and do two quick questions, which I'll try and give a point of view on. Charles has asked, is it advantageous to book flights through the cruise line or directly with the airline? A lot of this depends on what you like to do. Personally, I like to book flights myself, not through the cruise line. And the reason I like to do that is I like to collect points. I sometimes like to use air miles, and I like to choose exactly what flights I'm on. I like to use my seats. I like to book them way in advance, etc., etc., etc. So I like to book them myself because I feel I can get the best price, the sharpest price. I can look at the different options, and I feel I have much more flexibility. However, if you book with the cruise line, it means that you have booking as one whole entity. So particularly when things are chopping and changing and being cancelled, sometimes having just one booking is easy. So for example, the disadvantage I had with booking all my cruises and my flights separately is as they've been cancelled, I've had to manage, the refunds for the cruises, then I've had to manage the refunds for the flights, and it's been quite complicated, lots of different calls, whereas it's just with one booking, it's all just managed by itself. Now, the way of getting around that, for example, is working with a travel agent who will bundle that all together. And, so for example, like in March, one of the cruises I'm doing, I'm working with a travel agent there, Sarah Bolton in the UK. And what she's doing is putting together a whole thing, which includes the flights and transfers and that stuff, and the advantage and the cruises and all sorts of hotels and all sorts, because it's quite a complicated trip. And the advantage of that is one point of contact. So she's finding me the best prices and options on flights. So I get all that. I'm still managing if I want to arrange with the transfers with the cruise line, if I want those or whatever. But I find generally doing it separately is better. I've looked at hotels, for example, booking hotels with the cruise lines. I find the rates to be higher than I think I can get elsewhere. So my personal preference is I'm happy to do it separately. It's much more messy, and it's definitely been a disadvantage at this point in time. So let me answer this quick question from Irish in USA. Good morning, Gary. Travel insurance, what updates are there? Cruise line insurance versus independent insurance. Personally, I would always go with separate insurance for a number of reasons. One of which is if you go with separate insurance, you can make sure that it's much more comprehensive. It covers things in much more detail. So I just I find that policy, I can tailor it to what I need. Secondly, although I also like to buy annual travel insurance, that's because I'm traveling a lot rather than one-offs. But even when I'm booking for my mother, for example, who's 82, or my partner's mother, who's 74, we buy individual policies for them again, because we can go into the details. Very importantly for that, and at this time, is also related to the whole COVID-19 issue. At the moment, many travel insurances are excluding COVID-19. But there's been some recent developments, which also, if you're buying it separately, you can then make sure that you manage and work around. So, for example, Saga Cruises, which is based in the UK, they run their own cruise ships. They're a big insurance company as well. What they have done is they bundle insurance into their cruises, which is good. But they have also guaranteed that COVID is covered, and any repatriations or medical expenses related will be covered. Another insurance company called Stay Sure, they've also started building COVID-19. So the advantage of doing it separately, independently, is you can really work to craft it, make sure it's covering every little detail that you want. Does it cover cancel for any reason? So that's why I would always go for independent insurance rather than a kind of a blanket cruise line. Pullmantur is in bankruptcy, question mark, game over. Pullmantur have announced that they have cancel all their cruises through to, I think, it's November. They're putting the ships into cold storage. I haven't heard anything about bankruptcy. For those who don't know, Pullmantur, it's a joint venture with Royal Caribbean, so it's probably not one of their big priorities. It's mostly catering French passengers a lot. I haven't heard anything about it going into bankruptcy, but they definitely put it into cold storage and they've cancelled through to October. I've heard nothing else. And it's one thing that a couple of people have asked me, and I'll keep I keep an eye on that. Robert, again, making the point, cruise lines are letting you book when they don't know the dates they're sailing. Again, come back to my point I made earlier. If you are booking a cruise, bear in mind you're booking a cruise when no one knows if it's operating. So before you lock down a cruise, make sure that you're comfortable with that. Like I mentioned earlier, some of the cruise lines are doing really low deposits, refundable deposits, the Cruise with Confidence program, where you can cancel up to 48 hours before. But just be really clear that until cruise lines are allowed to cruise, you're booking a cruise which may or may not happen. So that is today's. We spent an hour answering questions. As I said, I will go back and answer questions. So like, have I done an Antarctic cruise? Yes, I have. I've got videos about that. I'll talk about that more next time and maybe send some links for that. I'll pick up one of those cruises. So I know I've probably missed some of the cruises. I've seen things about they're trying to convince people to go to Norwegian Fjords. I would say on Norwegian Fjords, I thought Norwegian Fjords was a very dumb idea. I thought it was going to be the dullest cruise I did. When I was completely sold. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of videos about Norwegian cruise, but it's definitely one of those. It sounds very dull. It's beautiful and incredible. So there you are. That's what I've got. What I'd like to say is now live at 6 o'clock. As the time of recording is, today's video, Sunday's video, has just gone live. So if you want even more of me, if you're a real sucker for that, and you want to watch another video or a video, feel free to look on the channel. It's about cruise suites, the pros and cons of cruising in a suite. Try not to do everything just about COVID-19 and whatever, trying to build some other content there. I really appreciate everyone who's joined. Hope you find it helpful. And hopefully, I apologize if I haven't answered all your questions. I'll go through and make sure I cover those again or bundle them into a video. Have a great weekend. Watch more videos. And thanks very much for watching.